Good evening. The University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Squamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. My name is Alexis Harris, and I'm a professor of sociology here at the University of Washington. I'm also the faculty athletics representative. So while I do not work in the athletic department, I am charged with engaging with our ICA about issues related to academic success and standards, NCAA compliance issues, and student athletes' health and wellness. I will be moderating this panel tonight. And the aim of our conversation tonight is really to engage with our campus community to discuss the role of athletics and activism, Husky sports, social justice, and COVID. I'd like to begin our conversation with setting the context with two quotes. The first is from the NCAA website. If you just Google student athlete activism, it pops up. The statement is from the NCAA Board of Governors on social activism from June 2020, and it reads, quote, President Mark Emmert and the NCAA Board of Governors recognize the important role social engagement has on driving positive societal change. The recent demonstrations following the tragic killing of George Floyd showed the world the power of protest, and student athletes across the country were at the center of that movement. We commend NCAA student athletes who recognized the need for change and took action through safe and peaceful protest. We encourage students to continue to make their voices heard on these important issues, engage in community activism, and exercise their constitutional rights. They juxtapose that quote with another one from Nelson Mandela, an activist, a revolutionary, a former political prisoner who was incarcerated for 27 years, and a political leader from South Africa. The quote reads, "Sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. Sport can awaken hope where there was previously only despair. It laughs in the face of all types of discrimination." So we have seen the world change this past year. COVID has highlighted the racial and economic inequalities in the United States suffers from healthcare inequities, educational, housing, and employment. We have seen inequality across the United States with a series of public killings of Black men by the police. We have a heightened sense of criminal legal inequalities that exist today in the United States. Even further, today was stained with a mass shooting in Santa Clara County, California, and I want to acknowledge the loss of life there. In the beginning of May this year, we've already had 194 shootings in just 18 weeks in this country. So this is just to name a few of the social problems that we suffer from as a country collectively. There are a wealth of social injustices that need advocacy, discussion, and processing in our country. And our panel tonight really wants to center how can athletes engage in these conversations? What is the role for college and professional athletes and coaches in movements for reform? And we have the perfect panelists to help us engage in this conversation. So we have UW head football coach Jimmy Lake. He may just be 4 games into his career as a college football head coach, but his resume already shows that he has all the tools to perform at the highest level. Coach Lake was hired to replace former Huskies head coach Chris Peterson on December 2nd, 2019, the very same day that Coach Peterson announced he was stepping down. Coach Lake's first year in charge, the 2020 season, was cut short due to the worldwide pandemic, as the Huskies were only able to play just 4 games. Nonetheless, his Huskies won the Pac-12 North Division title and produced 4 players who earned some level of All-American acclaim. Sheridan Blanford, class of 2016, was named the Associate Athletics Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at the University of Washington in December 2020. She is responsible for design, facilitation, and implementation of programs, policies, and procedures that align with the commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion for staff and students for the university athletics. Formerly, Sheridan served as the Director of Inclusion Engagement at the other UW, the University of Wisconsin Athletics Department, but we are the best. Sheridan graduated from St. Olaf College, where she played basketball and earned her master's degree in intercollegiate athletic leadership here from the University of Washington. Sophia Summers is a second-year student athlete on the women's indoor volleyball team. They recently won the Pac-12 championship and finished their season in the national semifinals. Congratulations on that feat. She is an executive board member on the Black Student Athlete Alliance that specializes in alumni relations. She also has an internship at Change and Innovation Agency where she works to increase efficiency of government systems. She is currently a medical anthropology and global health major who hopes to attend grad school. And we have San Francisco Giants outfielder Braden Bishop, who played for the Huskies from 2013 to 2015 before going pro. He was drafted by the Mariners in 2015 and played here in Seattle just up until earlier this month. Off the field, Bishop works for families affected by Alzheimer's with his For Mom charity and is very vocal and impassioned in his support for racial justice and the Black Lives Matter movement. So we have the perfect set of folks here connected to the University of Washington to share their thoughts on sports and social justice. I'm going to begin with the first question. That's for all of the panelists, and I'll just sort of call you in order that I see you. But the first question is, what are the key issues that are important to you in creating change? Sheridan, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, I can start. Again, as we were kind of in the back end, just thanking you all and super excited and honored to be on this panel. So thank you for your time. Thank you for the invitation, and just really excited to shed light on this very, very, very important topic. This is a hard question for me because I am one that is passionate about a lot of things, but particularly related to this panel and my current role at the University of Washington is kind of a two-part thing that I'll say, give two different examples. So the first and probably the most obvious is student athlete activism, and really, really developing and investing in our young people related to civic engagement and social responsibility. It is an honor and a privilege to be in this role during this time. I think we are in 2021 in a different space than we've ever been in, granted, from the COVID pandemic to all of the things, as you were mentioning, Dr. Harris, that we've just witnessed within this last year, and even as you're mentioning within the last 4 or 5 months. But student athletes are what I believe to be the most vocal they're the most vocal than they've ever been before. And it's because they have the platform to do so, but they also there's power in number. And the power is that, as you were mentioning, student athletes being able to come together to collectively bring awareness and advocate for and change things. It's an incredible thing. So I'm incredibly passionate about, with regard to creating change that we need to see, is really investing in our young people, helping them figure out what they're passionate about, pushing them to really figure out, okay, you're passionate about this. Now, what does this look like for you? How do you want to give back? How do you want to make an impact? How do you want to be remembered? And really helping them think about themselves outside of the athletic, their athletic identity, but utilizing that as a platform. And then the second piece of that is when we're thinking about change related to activism, and just kind of the shift within the diversity, equity, inclusion space and commitment to, I'm very, very focused on the people in positions of leadership and power. I like to say that student athletes, they can come in and they can influence culture, and they're there for 4 or 5, in Braden's case, 2 years, 6 years at a time, right? And they can come in and bring passion and insight and perspective. But ultimately, it's up to the leaders who are in positions of power to determine what that culture is going to look like and maintain that or sustain that. So as much as the student athletes can kind of push and give perspective, I'm really focused on how do we hold our leaders accountable? How are we, thinking from a systems level perspective with regard to change? How are we putting policies and practices and procedures around supporting our students and supporting the people that support our students? So I would say really focusing on, again, that student activism piece and helping our student athletes find their voice, along with really focusing on making sure our leaders are equipped to create a culture where our student athletes can do so.
That's great. So like a two-pronged approach, the students pushing in a collective sense, but then the leadership recognizing the need for real change. Braden, what are your thoughts about the sort of the key issues that are important to you in creating change?
Gosh, I mean, there's a lot, but I think the biggest for me is we're just passionate. Athletes are passionate. Like that's kind of where most of us, especially if you make it to the college level, you're going to be driven. And that comes on the field, but a lot of times it comes off the field. Like I know in my personal circumstance. My mom was sick when I was at school at UW. And so I took like that passion and drive that I had that I'll put into my game every day. And I put it towards who I was as a human as well. I was like, how can I touch and help as many people as I possibly can? People who are hurting, people who don't have answers. And, as I grew, and I'm speaking on my charity side, is like I saw how many people that I could help. And I learned to listen because I have 2 ears and one mouth. And I feel like God did that for a reason, because we should be listening. And then as as my perspective grew and, I get exposed to the world and to business, after I got drafted, you see real pain in the world. And, I learned to take that same approach of like, okay, I'm a people person. Like I want to help people, I want to love people. Okay. I hear my, my African-American teammates constantly from 2015, when I went into professional baseball to present day, I'm hearing them talking about how they're scared to be pulled over by the police, they're, what their families go through, the schools they were exposed to. And I'm like, why is this? And so that made me jump in on a deeper level educationally of like really like connecting with people like you, Dr. Harris, and Terry Scott and Common Power and all these, Jesse Hagopian, who's an activist in Seattle, like really learning, these issues on a deeper level, education, and just how, and for me, that's kind of where I started was education. How can I try and help on that level, whether it's providing resources to schools that are underfunded, getting people in touch with those students to try and just help give them guidance. And so for me, that's where it started, was the education and the lack of it in marginalized communities. And for me, that's the thing that I focus on the most.
Thank you for that. So seeing hurt and having passion for change and then taking action, it's powerful. Coach Lake, what do you think the key issues that are most important to you for creating change?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for hosting this and putting this together. For me, especially after the George Floyd incident of last year, I went round and around as like what we could do to show real, true change. I'm the son of a serviceman. He was in the Air Force. My dad was in the Air Force and served over 25 years for the United States military. And I know how voting changes everything, and the power of voting, and the power. You mentioned, Sheridan mentioned about people in positions of power and how they can affect change. And well, what I wanted to show our team is we have that power to register to vote and then actively vote to put people in the positions of power to make sure they are making decisions on our behalf. And I know as a young person, 18 years old to 22, that's probably the last thing you're thinking about is, oh, I'm going to go down, or I'm going to get my ballot, fill out my ballot, and you don't even know who the names are. And you're like, I'm not even going to do this. Well, if we look back on that incident in Minnesota, there's a power to put people to vote for the people that are the mayor, the governor of those states, of those cities, who hired the police commissioner who hires the police officers and puts them through the right regimen to make sure they're putting people in the right places to treat people correctly. And so right after that horrible incident of last year, we had our whole team registered to vote 100%. I know it also had a ripple effect for the rest of the Pac-12. Our Pac-12 head coaches saw what we were doing here with our football program. And I know a lot of the other football programs in our Pac-12 footprint did the same thing. And I also know a lot of our sports here at the University of Washington also followed our lead in that. And so now we're going to keep reminding them that the power of voting. If we want true change, we have to put leaders in position to make better decisions to represent us. And then the second piece, which we're waiting on to do until we can do in-person meetings, but our team knows that we're going to do this. And this is something I've been passionate about for years, ever since the Rodney King incident of way back when I was college age, is we're going to bring in police officers to the University of Washington in front of our team, and it's going to be an open forum, and we're going to talk it out. And it's going to be a forum of the police officers are going to get to know our team, and our team is going to get to know police officers. I have a brother-in-law that's a police officer. We all know a police officer that does amazing work. But how can we get these people that have power to pull somebody over, like Braden just mentioned, and do terrible things? How can we make sure that those people are educated and can handle those situations correctly? And so I have a laundry list of issues that we're going to be talking about in this open forum, and one of them is going to be restraints, and how you restrain somebody that's not listening to police commands, and how these restraints shouldn't end in somebody dying. We're gonna bring in. So I've already made some phone calls to a lot of police officers, and they said, "Hey, this is a great idea. I'm going to bring this guy. I'm going to bring this guy." And then he goes, "You know what? I'm not going to bring this one police officer though. I don't know how he's handled it." And I go, "Oh no. That's the one I want here. I want him here in the building, so he gets to meet our players, and he gets to see that our players are just like your brother, just like your son. These are great young men. You should not treat these young men any different than you treat your own son, your own brother." And so that education piece for our police officers, and then for our team to also see, okay, these guys are, even though they have a badge on, they have a uniform on, there's really great police officers out there that do great work. And so my last piece on this, and this is coming from me, is our police officers need a college education. I think that's a problem in our country right now. Our police, they can go straight from high school and they can be a police officer going around the street, and education is power. Education is power, and the more educated people we have in higher positions, I think they'll make better decisions, and I think that can change the way our police work happens in the United States.
It's really interesting. You're highlighting two key mechanisms. One, voting, and we did have 100% of our student athletes who were eligible to register to vote. So that was super exciting this past year. But then the other mechanism is trying to maybe change the police culture or the norms, assumptions, stereotypes that happen from both sides, which is really, really powerful. We'll circle back on that, but I want to give Sophia a chance to highlight the key issues for her that are important in creating change.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me too on this panel. I'm really happy to be here. Coach Lake, I feel like you stole my points a little bit here, but that's okay. We're gonna keep going. I also wanted to talk about voting because I really feel like that's where change actualizes and where it manifests in our country. And I feel like as a student athlete, like as a really young person who was really radicalized by the events of the summer, and I think a lot of other student athletes were too, especially with just how young we are and where we are in our lives. We're kind of in a bubble though sometimes as student athletes, and it feels like things go on outside of athletics that don't touch us in the same way. But I think that led to a lot of people feeling really passionate about these issues, but feeling also a little bit lost about where to go with that and how to channel that and what to do with that anger and what to do with all of that. And so voting became a huge topic for me, at least, because, you know, that's a way that, you know, we can be action oriented in change and activism and the things that you want to see in the world and the changes that you want to make. And also a way to follow up on, you know, your opinions and the things that you're saying, you know, and put weight behind your words. And so it was really great to see UW's response to that and like to make sure that athletes were registered to vote and the outreach that was done from ICA to make sure like that if you needed any assistance whatsoever, that it was there and it was available. So I was really proud of that in our university, and I was really proud of my team and their response too. And I also wanted to talk about confrontation and difficult conversations. I think that that's a key point in creating change. You know, a lot of times we talk about this macro level of change that we want to see, but I think a lot of that starts with conversations like the conversations you're going to have between the football team and police officers, where we humanize each other and we understand and we listen. And I think it's really difficult to have conversations with people who are close to you, especially when it's been taboo for so long. And it's difficult to walk up to someone that you trust and respect, like maybe your coach or your teammate, and have a frank conversation about race or sexism or COVID or other like social inequalities. And I think it's understated sometimes how much impact it makes to talk to someone from a human to human basis and deconstruct stereotypes and whatnot. And the last thing I just wanted to touch on was ICA as a whole, and really promoting a holistic environment within ICA as in regard to like an education emphasis and a career emphasis and representation. Because, you know, again, being an athlete, we're really sports oriented. And so sometimes I think that gets lost into being like, you know, professional sports is like the end, and like this is our whole life. And I think like promoting education, especially in sports that are really popular, like football and basketball, and making sure that, you know, we're prepared for after college, and you see young POC athletes aspire to be other things other than, you know, professional sports players. That's super important, and like that helps build a whole culture of excellence in all facets, like seeing women in positions of power, like you, Sheridan, or Alexis, and seeing people of color. It's just really important from my perspective.
That's powerful. That you added more to our mechanisms here in terms of voting, but also having these difficult conversations amongst your peers and across ICA. And that's why we're so excited to have Sheridan here to help us do those conversations across our department. And also really supporting identities. I think that's a powerful statement, is, you know, representation matters. And I really appreciate that. One question I want to have is, so we're talking about this space, and it sounds amazing. The NCAA has set the standard and, right, sort of allowing, if you will, are encouraging student athletes to engage. And then you've said that at UW, you feel very supportive of being an engaged student. But for Sophia and Braden, do you think that you feel a pressure to engage in social movements? Do you think your peers feel pressured, or, you know, are there folks who don't want to speak out? Sort of what do you think is the appropriate role for current athletes, both in college and professional, in raising awareness about some of these issues that Sophia talked about, racism and sexism and other inequalities? I'll throw that to you first, Braden.
Yeah, I'm very curious to hear what Sophia has to say, because, you know, obviously professional is different, because, you know, we talked about this a couple weeks ago on the panel with UW history, was when a lot of money is involved, guys, it's almost, you'd think that guys would be more comfortable speaking out and like using that platform, but I've actually seen it work the complete opposite. Was that guys have kind of got it, like made it, like, I'm good, I've taken care of my family, like I'm just gonna focus on. There was a player, I have a story to kind of tie this together, but we ended up boycotting a game last year after Jacob Blake was shot, and it was like one of the most powerful experiences to see, because at the time we had 9 African American players, like most in the major leagues by far, and Jacob Blake was killed. The Bucks and I think the whole WNBA ended up boycotting, and it kind of, all of our African American players walked into the stadium together and visibly shaken, and walked straight into our manager's office and said, "We can't play today." And then we ended up having a team meeting, and Dee Gordon, who was our leader at the time, basically said, "You guys," and this is a guy who was on a 5-year, $50 million contract. So from an outsider's perspective, you might say, you know, why is this guy he has it. He's made it. Why is he doesn't, this isn't his issue. And for him to stand up and go, you guys can think whatever you want of me, but like, I have to do this for my family and my cousins and the people who look up to me in my community back in Florida. Like, I have to do this. And of course, pretty much the whole team was like, absolutely, we're behind you 100%. And there was a few players not in our clubhouse that were like, well, if you guys do this, we want the win because, there's money on the line. And for me, I was just like, you got to be kidding. Like, the money should never trump people, ever. And so like to see it on a professional level, like once that money comes in, a lot of times it's over people and it's over pain and trauma. And, I think that's a major issue. And you're also dealing with guys who, from my perspective, are older. They might been through more. They might not be as passionate about doing stuff off the field, because it's a business to them. And so they do lose some of that passion and that drive to affect change. Mm-hmm. And I also think that's a problem. So in my circles, I really try to encourage, people to just speak and listen. And if you're passionate, like, don't be afraid of what's the backlash that's going to come, because there's always going to be people who disagree with you, people who tell you you're not good, you can't do things. But what's right is right. And that's my guiding principle.
Thank you for that. Sophia, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. I hear you, Brayden there. I don't know. I mean, I think if an athlete or really a person is susceptible to struggles with an oppressive social issue like sexism or racism or any other social inequality, then I believe that they have the right to advocate for it. And a lot of people might argue that it's inappropriate because sports is supposed to be a neutral place. But I think sometimes, the word athlete gets misconstrued for neutral, and that's not true at all. We heard this a lot over the course of the last year, that athletes are more than just people or more than just athletes, and I can't express how true that is. Like I'm an athlete, but I'm a woman first. I'm a person of color first, and those are the main factors that influence my life, not necessarily that I'm an athlete, so a lot of people are deeply impacted by these issues. And so I think it's really misconstrued to assume that we won't act impacted, and that's why I think there's a major intersection between advocacy and sport. And, I think we saw that this year in a lot of athletes using their platforms for social change and to advocate for that. And even within sport, in regard to kneeling or wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt or, confronting, instances on their teams or in their programs that fell short in regard to equality. So, whether or not it's appropriate, I think it's almost necessary and inherent, from that perspective. And, as college athletes, we still have a lot to lose, but not in the same way that professional athletes do, because of the money aspect. And I talk about this a little bit later, but there's not a ton of autonomy sometimes with being an athlete and being able to express yourself because of NCAA rules and because of just that. But it came up a lot over the course of our season. And I had a really interesting conversation with my own teammates who I respect so much. And we sort of got to talking about the essence of the issue being unity or individualism, because as a program, our actions as athletes reflect our program at the end of the day. And so what we did inherently affects what the program says, And so we wanted to present a unified front against racism. But, you know, for me individually, like I have a Black Lives Matter shirt. I wholeheartedly believe that. So I was going to wear it at every single sporting event that I attended this year, you know? And so it's not necessarily about disagreeing or a lack of diversity on our team and different opinions. It's more about, you know, the balance between those two things and how, you know, you can say something individual while still, you know, being part of something larger, and not fearing the backlash that comes with that, and creating an environment where it's healthy to do so.
Right, I hear that. Coach Lake, I'll sort of turn to you and play off of what Sophia just was talking about in two ways. One, for the students that you get to work with, how have you sort of supported them in both collectively making stances around social justice or individually? And then two, what role do you think coaches play across NCAA in promoting social justice or at least supporting their students?
Yeah, I'll start there with the coaches, and it's almost, you know, I'm going to see what Braden said here. You know, if it feels right, then you should stand up for it. And last year, it was just like, it was a no-brainer. If that had happened to anybody, it was like, what is this police officer doing? It's just it's humanity, and we should all step up and say something. It shouldn't matter if you shouldn't be worried about dollars, you shouldn't be worried about anything. You shouldn't worry about misrepresenting your volleyball program, whatever it is. If it feels right, then you need to stand up for it. And so, from a coach's perspective, from an AD or a general manager of a professional club, if it feels right, you need to step up and you need to voice your opinion on that. And thankfully, that's what a lot of the world did last year in that horrific event last year. Now, to our student athletes, they have a space with their position coaches, but also as a team. We have a bunch of team meetings where it is just focused on, hey, let's talk about this. And we've had some emotional talks. Coaches sharing, myself, and you know, older coaches and some of our younger coaches sharing experiences that have happened to them during their lives, and then our players being able to share you know, instances that have happened in their life or how they feel about situations that are going on right now in our country. And so just having that space to be able to talk. But we have an awesome culture here where our players feel very comfortable just to come up into their position coach's office or my office, and they can have a one-on-one as well. And, you know, I think for our players to be able to do something through social media, something so where they're doing it on their own to show their stance and where they feel they want to share to the world where they are at on these big topics. We give them the freedom. It's like, here you go. This is why you're here for a bunch of reasons. It's not just to go out there and score touchdowns and kick field goals, and you're here to grow as a person. And if you're really passionate about this, you need to share that. And so we definitely empower our student athletes to voice their opinions. And you know, if it feels right, you need to do something about it and take a stance.
Great. Sheridan, I'll ask you, I mean, you've been at two different institutions, and we've also seen nationally in the University in Texas, right, that push back against student athletes for organizing. So how have you seen different leadership orientations to supporting students who want to engage in social justice issues, and what can universities do to better support their students?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. A big one, but I'll do my best to make it as digestible as I can. Is this all leaders lead differently, but we are in a space, particularly if we're talking about college athletics, but even larger, is like we are here to develop people, humans, young people in the space of college sport. And I think oftentimes people lose sight of that. And I love the way I wrote it down, Sophia. I'm just, girl, you're dropping dimes. I'm writing all the little quotes down. But you talked about the word athlete gets construed with neutral. And I think very much people get very hyper focused on athlete, or as Coach Lake was saying, the touchdowns, or, you know, what they're doing on the field, how they're scoring, that type of thing. And then the academic side is also very, very important. but people lose sight of people. And back to Sophia's point is all these experiences and these identities that we're bringing into play, they are going to determine how we experience the world. And when leaders, wherever they are, choose to lose sight of that or overlook that or try to overshadow that with different things, they are disservicing the same athletes or the same humans that they are saying that they are there to help develop and become all the great things that they need to become. And it's all that being said is there's leadership philosophies and there's high level visions and goals, but all of this boils down to particular human beings and how they view the world and how they then view these challenges and they then view these issues. And I would say, if you look across the broad paintbrush strip of college athletics, is leadership across the board is not very diverse. And we can say diverse racially and then diverse through gender. But then obviously if we unpack a handful of the different underrepresented identities, it's not a super diverse industry, not different than the rest of the world. But with that, I think what happened this last year is it hit a lot of people in the face because they were so hyper-focused on the product or, very explicit things that they were doing within their department or initiatives that they were working on. And it didn't matter where you were at, unless you were quite literally living under a rock. You got hit in between the eyes really to realize what is going on in our society. And I think with that, it really started to push a lot of leaders to think about, what does this mean for my department? What does this mean for my student athletes? What does this mean to lead? But also what does this mean for me? How do I start to wrestle with what I don't know, what I've done wrong? Having those difficult conversations, having the discomfort in some of my spheres or the people I spend my time with. So I think with that, how that translates into supporting students is people have to really understand themselves. Like we often focus on these really big issues. We're talking about voting, we're talking about COVID, we're talking about police brutality, we're talking about systemic racism, and people get really high, pie in the sky. Let's understand these big concepts. But then what they fail to do is they fail to boil that down to really think about, how does that impact me and how I show up in the world? And if everyone does their part, I'm convinced that we're not in the same situation we're in. But again, we have to really, it's a very, very individualized approach that people have to take, and I think hold themselves accountable along with their spheres of influence to make sure that the students feel supported. And back to Coach Lake's point about just, if you're passionate about something, if you see something, we have to make sure that these spaces feel safe for our students to do so. This last year, again, was different than any other year because it was in our face whether we want it to be or not, especially with the student athlete activism and then taking stances on multiple causes. But we have to create environments and spaces where students feel safe, that they can speak up, that they can act, that they can push against, because a social injustice means that it's an injustice to somebody, but that means that another group is upholding this injustice or benefiting from this injustice. And usually that means you're stirring the pot, you're trying to change something. And change isn't easy, especially back to Sophia's point about being the person to bring that up. It's not always easy. So we have to be really mindful in leadership positions across the board to make sure that these environments are safe, but then they are also, we advocate that this is what we're looking for. We want people to come. We want people to push us. We want people to use their platform. So it's very much of an individual. People got to get real with themselves and think about how their views, their biases, how they view the world really influence their leadership. And then being really mindful of how do you support your students in doing this? So that's what I would say.
I think that's a really important point. I think and it's not just for athletics, but it's for universities in general or businesses. Everyone's sort of assessing their role in the social injustice that's been occurring. Sophia and Braden, you both sort of mentioned the different ways that diversity matters in sort of cultivating your passion and also educating you. So Sophia, you mentioned having representation of people who look like you, and then Braden having teammates that were African-American that you could see the pain and learn from them. I'll sort of put it to everyone, but I'll call out in order. But how do you think we can increase diversity in coaching, head coaches, on teams that are traditionally all white? Where do we even begin to increase representation of non-white folks on these teams? Do you have ideas? Does anyone, Jimmy, Coach Lake, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first because I've done a lot of research on this, and it's in my world, in the football world, but I think it could relate to other sports as well. And so what happens in football is usually across the board, Black coaches will get hired to be position coaches so they can go into those neighborhoods in those cities and get those talented young men and then bring them back to the university. And that still happens to this day. And so we've had these big functions where it's a lot of coaches of color, all different types of backgrounds. And I had a platform to talk about this last year. And what I've always pushed for, and I've always told my colleagues, is we need to push to be coordinators. When you're a coordinator, you are second in command to the head coach. And if we become more coordinators, we will get more opportunities to now make that jump up to becoming a head coach, similar to my path here. And it took me a long time to get to this position, but also get to the position of defensive coordinator, which I felt like I could have had decades ago, but I didn't because of various reasons. Because we all get lumped in like, oh, he's just a really good recruiter. He can just go out there and get those kids. But we don't want him in charge of the whole defense. No, we don't want him to do that. And so I think the more we can push our young coaches to strive to be coordinators, that'll make them become very attractive candidates to become head coaches.
Right. Yeah, no, I was just going to push a little bit because that's interesting. Like they can set their motivation and their goals, but what is it? Why are they just sort of lumped in these, recruiting roles? Is it anti-Blackness? Is it stereotypes? What is it?
Well, yeah, that's interesting. I think, I think the core, that's our problem, right? That's the core of it is people in leadership positions want people that look like them. And so let's start with, and our university is not a good example, but other places, the president of a university or the president of a ball club is going to want to hire a head coach that looks similar to him and feels similar to him and someone he can relate to. And a lot of times that very, very top person is white and he's male. And so they're going to want to hire somebody that is very similar to them, and then on down we go. Now, of course, that doesn't happen everywhere, but that happens a lot of places. And so I think that's why that happens. And so the more people we can get in those positions, then we'll be able to hire. They'll be able to hire people that are similar to them, and then here we go. But at the same time, we got to hire the best candidate as well. It doesn't just mean we're just going to hire people of color across the board and all those, but we got to give people fair opportunities. And so in my profession, even at the NFL level and at college, what happens is African-American coaches get paid a lot of money to be those recruiters, a lot of money to be those recruiters, or to be that position coach in the National Football League. Very, very cozy job to make X amount of dollars to be the running back coach for X NFL team. And then all of a sudden that drive is like, oh, you know what? I'm taking care of mine. I'm pretty good. I'm the running back coach. And so what I told these coaches is we need to strive to be coordinators. Don't get comfortable just getting paid all that money to be a position coach. You're going to need to keep pushing, become that coordinator, and then you're going to get that opportunity to become that head coach. And that's how I know we can try to affect change in my profession.
Thank you for that. That's important insight, like insider insight on how these inequalities can be replicated. I appreciate that. Sophia or Braden, do you have ideas about how to diversify your sports, other sports, the world of athletics that aren't traditionally filled with people of color?
Yeah. I think I agree with what you said, Coach Lake. But I also really just think that people want people who understand them. And that's why I think a lot of times, you don't see as diverse of staff because, it's easier to understand what you know. And for a lot of people of color that go to predominantly white institutions or universities or whatever it may be, you're sometimes the first exposure that people have had to a different culture or a different way of doing things or a different way of understanding someone. And so I think it's not just about diversifying, panels or staffs or institutions with bodies, but also with how we talk about it, with exposure, with pushing stories and having conversations about race and having conversations about gender in those spaces, because it's not just about seeing someone, but it's also about understanding them, and really taking the time and creating a culture to do so is super, super important. And so I think it's a lot about having conversations, and it's also about having conversations about systemic barriers, which make it difficult for people of color or women or whoever it may be, low-income people, to get all the way to Division I athletics and overcome barriers like that. And it's a real problem, and it's something that I don't think we talk about enough as a group.
Yeah, no, I agree. And across any type of business, right? In academia, right? On tenure track, getting professors, for medical professionals, for judges, I study judges. It's always that same thing. It's that you get stuck in this sort of culture and who's going to fit, right? And who's not going to fit. And you have these barriers that we don't really kind of digest and dismantle. Braden, what are you thinking?
I can speak towards, there's two things. One, baseball is way too expensive, especially at the youth level. And so, of course, with it being so expensive, a lot of African American baseball players will choose cheaper sports because their families can't afford it. In their communities, the fields aren't as good, the resources aren't as good. They can't afford a ridiculous $500 metal bat, and that trickles down all the way from the top. There was one African American in the World Series last year. I think baseball is now at like 6% African American, but in my 6.5 years playing, the best players that I've seen are African American. And so I think providing resources to these communities, so these tremendous athletes can go and pursue, baseball, is healthier for the game, and it's healthier for our communities and for these players. And I think positionality of me being a white man and stepping into these communities, like Coach Lake, baseball is predominantly white and the coaches are predominantly white. So they're not going into these communities because, and I'm going to say it because they won't, is they feel uncomfortable. Like they'd rather go to the communities they're comfortable with and go with the players they're comfortable seeing. But like that whole tradition has to end. Like we have to, and I mean, this is more of me, is pushing these coaches and, even high school coach, like go into these communities, help these kids, because who knows, the next Willie Mays could be in that community. Like we don't know. And so as a white man, to stand up and to help try to provide these resources, for kids in Oakland, for kids in Kent, for kids in Pittsburgh. Like the other day, a couple of weeks ago, I've been trying to connect this one kid with a bunch of colleges, and my brother had gotten recruited by Ole Miss, which is a really, really good baseball school, and got him in touch, let him do his thing. Those coaches learned about this kid from inner city Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, commits to Ole Miss, and now he's going to be a shortstop at Ole Miss. And it's just like, if and I'm not trying to toot my own horn because it could be anybody, but if I hadn't made the connection, those coaches would have never gone to inner city Pittsburgh. And that's a tradition that needs to end, so these kids can get those opportunities and go play at a place like Ole Miss.
I appreciate you saying that. And it's not tooting your own horn, but it's really illustrating that we need all folks on deck, right? We need, I'm impressed with my baseball reference, but we need all folks to step up, right? And really, sorry, get in the game and make changes, right? And use their power and their privilege. And it's not just women, it's not just people of color, but if just that little step helped one person, imagine if every, professional athlete committed to doing something like that for someone, that would be powerful. I would be remiss if I didn't shift gears just a little bit. Oh, Sheridan, go ahead.
I just wanted to add components to kind of tie a bow on that is I think the access and the opportunity and the empowerment is huge. I think that to really invest in, people who are trying to get into like this, who are trying to play baseball, who are trying to go play volleyball, who are trying to play football, obviously in our case with those on the call, but that important investment into access, opportunity, empowerment, resources, all that stuff is incredibly important. But I want to just put a point on that is a lot of people everybody and their mom is really trying to increase diversity because this last year has really shined a light on the fact that we are not diverse in a lot of our spaces. And everyone's trying to get people into these spaces or trying to give them opportunities, trying to give them access, all those things, which is really, really important. But we have to make sure that when we get them into these spaces, that they're inclusive. So we have to really focus, before we're really focusing on diversity, we have to make sure that these spaces are set up for people to come and succeed. Because if they're coming into a culture that was not traditionally built for them, has lots of structures and systems that are not set up for them, is not there to support their unique, equitable needs, not equal needs, they're not going to succeed. And I think that's where, again, I'm just continuing to hover over the leaders in these spaces, the people that have influences. How are we changing the spaces so that when people get to where we're at, whether that's youth sports or all the way through pro sports, how are we making sure that the people that we're bringing in can thrive and succeed and then get to those places that Coach Lake is talking about, getting to those coordinators, getting to those head coaches. We have to make sure that the environments are set up so that they can get to that place, thrive and succeed, and then ultimately start to lift as they climb.
Right. And we can't be colorblind anymore. We have to be purposeful with our intent to increase diversity. Without that, we're going to continue to see all the racial and economic inequalities across the board. So we really have to be purposeful in what our stated aim is to attack anti-Blackness and racism. That trope's not going to work anymore. But I do want to shift a little bit and talk about the changing landscape of collegiate athletics. It's looming. July 1 is looming, and July 1 is NIL, name, image, and likeness. In many states now, July 1 is in Florida. That legislation will go in place where student athletes in college will have the ability to work with third-party entities, a local car dealership or a restaurant, to promote and use their image. Currently, student athletes under NCAA guidelines legislation cannot use their name, their image, or likeness to generate compensation, do commercials. But that's going to shift on July 1. Right now, it's across the states. We have no federal legislation, so it's a little bit of a wild west with how this is going to roll out. But we have that, and then we also have these regular challenges in our court system from O'Bannon. Started with the O'Bannon case, now it's Alston, with former student athletes and some current challenging the lack of payment or compensation from their universities. So this is going to throw like a wrench a bit into what both I think Coach Lake and Braden brought up about money, right? And the drive to get money might then silence people's voices. And so I just wondered what your thoughts are. If you haven't engaged with these, with NIL yet or thought about it much, please don't feel like you have to, but just that general notion of now there in some form, it will look like at some point in the next year that student athletes in some ways, currently you cannot legally do it in Washington State, but in some ways can get compensation for being a college athlete. How do you think that's going to change, particularly in regards to student athletes engaged in social justice issues? Anyone want to take that? Coach Lake.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I had to change my AirPods here. So, okay, awesome. Yeah, this is going to be interesting. There's a bunch of this. We could talk about this for probably about 5 hours. Though I feel like it's a little bit opening up Pandora's box a little bit of the issues that are going to happen. Part of it, I coach the NFL, and Braden's a professional athlete. there's inequities in those locker rooms right now with so-and-so's making this much money and so-and-so's making this much money. And they're adults and they're able to handle that. And I think of now we're down to college athletes, young college athletes, where there may be 3 to 4 people on a football team that get paid. Let's just say it's $200,000 in their accounts, and more power to them. I would love it if they were able to make that. But then what about the rest of the 113 guys that get 0? Okay. And then let's look across all sports now. Let's look at, our men's baseball team or, our women's beach volleyball team. Are they going to get any money? Is there any money going their way? Or is it just going to be the teams that are on TV all the time? Or just a couple of star players on our indoor volleyball team or our softball team? And so I think about the inequities between each team, between a men's team and a women's team, between the star player and then the backup left guard or the backup defensive tackle that's going to have 0. And so it's very interesting. I am all about empowering our student athletes to use their name, image, and likeness. I don't know if the NCAA's got it totally figured out just yet. I wish it was more of across the board, and maybe there was the piece of pie that everybody could engage in, and we could properly give more money to every student athlete in every single sport. I wish we started there, then had a vehicle later to maybe reward. I think of like a Miles Gaskin who played here, or Jake Browning, who are really the stars of our team, if you want to say, or a Buda Baker. Yeah, if they're selling jerseys and people want to put some money behind those guys' names because they're really, really phenomenal players and like the face of the program, then maybe they get that money down the road. What I worry about is now that star player is, he's driving a $200,000 vehicle into this place every single day, and then all the rest of the team, they're taking their little scooters in and the free bus with their Husky card. And so that's what I worry about. And so. Yeah. I can keep talking here. We've been going. This is about to affect our whole college landscape here, but I'll let Braden jump in.
Right.
Yeah,
I just want to say also to high school students out there right now in Washington State, you cannot accept compensation currently. So I don't want students to think that they can. You need to be really clear on the law, because we don't want you to misstep with NCAA regulation. I just wanted to,
and that's across the whole country. So that's not just Washington, that's everybody. There's nothing in place yet for the NCAA. So nobody can accept anything just yet.
Just to be clear with that. Thanks. Braden, what were you saying? Sorry.
So I have a question for you, Coach Lake. And it had come up on our panel a couple weeks ago, because there was a lot of people a lot smarter than me on that one, who know a lot more about this. But in terms of like an athlete standpoint, like I've been through the recruiting process, so has Sophia. And, you see those people who have created a brand, athletes, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, now it's getting wild with all their highlight tapes, they're posting and stuff like that. But, I had thought, if I'm a recruiter, does that change the way that you view a guy coming in that might be a distraction, for you and your team? Like how many coaches are going to stay away from guys who are trying to create this brand to get more money? Do they lose opportunity? I don't know this.
Right.
This is something as like a recruiter.
Well, I'll say this: we use social media already to do a lot of research on our prospects, and so does the NFL and Major League Baseball. They already look at your social media, and we train our guys to use their social media the right way, so they're representing themselves the right way. So the first thing the NFL is going to do, they're going to look at the tape. Okay, he's really good. Well, let's look at Elijah Molden. He's really good. One of our corners here just got drafted. And then they go right to his social media, like, what is this guy about? What is he about? And they look at it, and they look what he likes. They look what he retweets. And so that's currently going on right now. We do that right now with prospects that we're looking at. But I don't think I would think negatively on somebody that's trying to create a brand, that's trying to say, hey, I'm doing this. And maybe they're, whatever it is, they're holding up a Sprite and saying, yeah, I drink this every single day. It helps me hit home runs. And then all of a sudden, I wouldn't think anything different of that. What I would think differently of is if he was saying something really divisive tweeting something out that was very divisive, or really always the attention was going to him all the time, and he wasn't giving proper credit to his teammates or to his coaches or for the family and friends that helped get him to where he is. I would start thinking differently about that person, but not if they were trying to build their brand and get these sponsorships, which is going to happen with this new NIL.
Sophia, what are your thoughts about NIL?
Yeah. As an athlete, currently, I feel like a lot of us are just sort of waiting for them to happen because we've been talking about them for a really long time. And, I talked about this a little bit earlier, but between our schedules and NCAA rules, there's very little room for autonomy. And so I feel like we've progressed enough as a society to know that we should allow us to profit off of our own name, image, and likeness, like our own brands, because this is a privilege that everyone else in the world is entitled to in their workplace, or not in the world, but at least here in the US. That's legal. You'd be trademarked, you'd have, patents on your name, and, you wouldn't allow someone else to profit off of it, without your permission. And, we give our permission because a lot of us are scholarship athletes, and a lot of us work really hard, and we're provided an education. But, I think zooming out a little bit, especially for extreme revenue sports like football and basketball and baseball, you're seeing companies make millions, if not billions of dollars off of athletes and their success, college athletes and their success. And, these athletes, they're not getting anything right now. And we've created a space where, actually I know a football kid right now who owns a sweatshirt company, and nobody knows it's his sweatshirt company, and he only sells like 10 because, he can't promote it in any way. And, he can't even say, this is mine. Like, I built this, I own this, and so that's the place we're in right now. Mm-hmm. And, I think anything to get out of that place is a good start, honestly. Mm-hmm. Because these are things that, like, it's impacting our ability to build a future in some spaces. And, especially for really, really talented athletes, they have a brand, and, there are sports that are more popular than others. And so some sports will inevitably get a lot more money and a lot more attention, but it's also, hand in hand, like, they are better in some respects, you know what I mean? And like they have better numbers or whatever it is, or they have a bigger brand, and that's, and not something I think that we can take away from people. And so I don't know, I'm sort of just waiting for it to happen is what I'm trying to say. And, in regard to, what people choose to associate themselves with as in terms of brand deals, it's your responsibility what you want your brand to be. If you want to associate yourself with the social justice movement or an anti-social justice movement, then that is your respect. And like, people can take whatever they want from that, and so I think that's sort of individualized. And I think there's got to be more structure in terms of like how we guide people into that. Mm-hmm. But, as of now, we've created this space where, there's not much that we can do, and we've created a space that's, systemically opposed to us profiting off of our own names. And so I think that has to change. And, it's above my head a little bit. Like, I'm not the person who's going to figure all of that out and how that's going to be distributed amongst a lot of people. But I definitely think that we've got to move forward in some respects here.
Yeah.
Can I jump in there real quick? Because I completely agree with Sophia that that the athletes need to be rewarded, and I just wish there was going to be a system first to get that money on the table first. Because you're right, the NCAA makes a lot of money. You think of the Final Four tournament, the CFP, College World Series. All these TV deals, and that's where I wish there was just this big chunk of money. And then here we go. Let's do that first. Let's get some more money to these student athletes who devote a ton of their time, to be great at their sport. And then, oh yeah, by the way, you're trying to get this big time degree.
Yeah.
And so I think we should start there first. Then the other sticky part of this as well is the cheating that goes on in recruiting. And so now this is a whole other, I mentioned Pandora's box. So here we go. So now here's 5-star recruit coming in, and the money that's gonna change hands, which right now there is already cheating that goes on, especially in different parts of the country, which we all know about. Doesn't happen out here out west that much, but it does happen at some places. But now this is going to open up everything now, and it is that's where. And this is speaking from a coach perspective, where this is going to get really, really messy. And these now young men or women that are not even in college yet, they're in the high school ranks, are going to have a ton of money floated around, and where they're almost going to go to the highest bidder. And that's what I know. Some people are going to be really they're going to want to press pause on this and try to get this thing right before it happens.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting because it's a whole nother level of social justice, or layer to social justice issues, with what type of students are going to get these higher bids and from whom, and how might that ruin their career moving forward if they're really shady. It definitely is. I mean, the next year, college athletics are going to change a great deal. Here at Washington, they've already are on the ball and have planned a class, fall quarter and foster school, for students and student athletes and non-student athletes to learn about NIL and sort of what are all the laws around it, or what could be the laws, and all these dimensions around recruiting. And guardrails is a term I've learned recently. So that's how we're approaching it, and educating and talking and having these conversations here. So I think that's really helpful. I did want to give space. We have about 20 minutes left. I wanted to give space for you all to ask each other questions. If you have questions, I don't know if you do. Oh gosh, I don't know what the ball thing is, but I don't know, a ball out of nowhere. I don't know what the reference would be. But,
you're passing the ball.
Yeah. Okay. Passing the ball to you guys. But do you have questions for each other?
I could definitely come up with something.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, this is the part where she like throws it at us, and we were like, oh, we had our questions set, and here she comes with the Dr. Harris special.
I have more questions to ask, but I just loved it when Braden asked Coach Lake a question, and then we had that engagement. So I just don't know. Braden?
I got one. I'll ask Sophia one. As like a current student athlete, like what are some current things? Because obviously, like voting, it was with the election last year. But like, what are some other things like you and your teammates are doing, or even within the athletic department, like to continue conversations?
Yeah. Well, a big part of last summer was figuring out, for me, like an action-oriented person, how to translate that into something that I could actually do. And so for me, a big part of that was joining the Black Student Athlete Alliance here at UW. And that has been a great space for me in order to advocate for the things I want, and to be a part of a community and promote a community. And so that's been something that's really big in terms of like creating a community and doing something that's tangible for student athletes to connect with. Because again, every team is also very individual in the way that they approach social justice. Because football and basketball, like women's basketball, they boycotted the national anthem at every match this year. They just didn't go out. But for our team or for other teams, it looks really different. And so, sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect in that regard, where it's like, each team is doing something that works for them and the people that they have on that team. But a big part of that is figuring out how you can individually participate. And a lot of that is through social media and like using that platform, because that's how you reach the greatest amount of people. And so in addition to having social media, it was just really important for us to create that space and really make it as good as it possibly could be this past year with the Black Student Athlete Alliance. And then again, encouraging in your own individual lives how you can best be a part of everything. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about my coach, Keegan Cook, and Tui and Jason. They're all amazing, and they have really created a space that is really about your character. And I think that's a common theme here at UW is when we recruit and when you commit here to the school and to like this athletic program, it's a lot about culture. We throw that word around a lot, and it's because it's important. And, creating a culture where we can have difficult conversations and we can have open-end conversations and we can listen in those conversations has been huge. And addressing those before practice or before, major events, it's like, hey, we're here, but this is a real thing that happened. Like we talked about that yesterday at practice. We're not gonna go through practice and not mention how a year ago the entire world changed because of that event. And so that's been huge. And my head coach Keegan Cook, I can't thank him enough. He really listens, and I think that's something that Coach Lake is huge for athletes. And I know that you're doing a great job creating a space where they can do that, but a lot of it is about listening. Not all the time are we going to have these great ideas about like how to change everything. Sometimes it's just about sitting in grief or whatever it may be from these events and hearing each other and understanding each other, and like having those spaces to be heard and not necessarily coming up with the solutions right at this minute.
Wow.
That's good.
Powerful.
Yeah, seriously.
I was a little bit of a tangent there, but
no,
That's great.
that was perfect to hear. I'll ask a question if you all don't have another one. What do you think could be the general role for alumni to support student athlete activism or hold the department accountable? This is to anyone.
Can I go again?
Please.
All right. I'm really passionate about this. Alumni, please, please, please talk to your peers, because talk to people who are your age, because as much as we want to be supported, the people who support us, but there's a lot of generational inconsistency in how social issues are approached because of progression and like a lot of things. And so I find that like the conversations my mom is having with like her white friends are a lot different than the conversations I'm having with my, roommates or teammates who come from generally the same background as me. And so that's huge. And, when you hear stuff or when you're watching games or when you're talking about those issues, those conversations that you're having with the people who are closest to you and who are in your circle is huge, especially those who have already graduated or are in a different generation.
Great. Braden, what are you thinking?
So, technically I'm not an alum yet because I still have 1 year left.
You are.
So Coach Lake, I got 1 year eligibility left. I'm just saying.
I'll take it.
But I think, speaking as a white man, over the past, and I've always been passionate about this because I grew up in the Bay Area. I played football growing up. I was in circles where I was exposed to this very early. At the time, East Palo Alto was like 5 miles from my house, and it was at the time the #1 city of murders in the United States. And I became passionate because my best friend growing up, African American from East Palo Alto, single parent home, we walked into a CVS pharmacy together from school, and he was asked to take his backpack off and I wasn't. And I remember being like, nah, this is BS. Like, I'm taking mine off too, or we're leaving, And so over the past year, I've gotten very passionate about making white people uncomfortable. Like I don't care about your comfort when people are dying and people are struggling, and there's this trauma that you refuse to listen to because white people have this problem of putting politics over people. And to me, human rights shouldn't be political first and then all the people under it. And so I know in my circles of, 25 to 30-year-olds is I'm going to push you to understand what's happening, not on a political level, because I don't care what your political affiliation is. Like sitting in that locker room in San Diego and hearing D. Gordon say that, there's a lot of white guys in that locker room too. And that was the first time that they saw 7 grown black men crying, like visibly hurt. And how do we make white people feel that and then feel comfortable enough to do something after? And not just say, I hear you, I'm with you, I'll post my black square, and then that's it. Like, that's not good enough. So as an alum in my circles, I'm going to make you uncomfortable. And especially if you're white and you don't understand.
Wow. Coach Lake?
Yeah. Oh, that's powerful by both of you. I wrote that down, politics over people. That's a great way to say it, Braden, because that's exactly the way I feel things don't get moved a lot, right? Is because people worry about their politics over just humanity. Just like you wouldn't let that happen to your daughter, your brother, your son, just humanity. So, and then Sophia, that was amazing. I think, our alumni and some of our donors and our boosters, we actually found out, where they really stood after last year's events. We got a lot of feedback when we all took our stance and said, hey, this isn't right. And then all of a sudden there was messages where, hey, you know what? I'm not donating money anymore. And we're like, okay, that's good. At least we know where you're at. All right, that's good. And so, that's it was interesting, and that was a small percentage, but like Sophia mentioned, if there is alumni out there, and we are sharing our platform as high profile people of this university, and we're or at our Major League Baseball club, and we're sharing our views, they need to help echo that with their friends, with the people they associate with, and build the momentum of what we're trying to project out there of our views and our stance, if they agree with it. Which most of the stuff that we're talking about is just simple humanity. It's not nothing crazy, nothing political. It's just like basic human rights, basic human equality, and again, I keep going back to Sophia. She's right about the generational thing. A lot of the people that quit giving money, they happen to be at a certain age that's almost double my age. And if we can get people, alumni of this university and boosters and donors of this university to have these uncomfortable conversations with their friends and their families, then we can start to move the needle.
Thank you for that. Sheridan, what do you think about this? How can we get alum involved, and how can we, if they're not ready to move the needle, like they're kind of in the middle of where Coach Lake, how can we get them a little bit closer to recognizing all of our humanity?
That's a great question. I don't want to go last anymore. Everyone's taking all my talking points. Y'all are good. I'm like, all right, I'll just put myself on mute. This is fantastic. Sophia, you started off, and I was like, crap, there goes my talking point. So y'all are on point. But I'll say, these words, these diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice, and colorblindness, and anti-racism, and they're buzzwords at this point. Everyone uses them interchangeably. People just are kind of throwing them out because all of us are kind of set, which is a good thing. I think we're being held accountable in a different way to caring about these issues than we have been before. But I think going back to that, like individual accountabilities, speaking to every alumni, myself included, is like, you have to understand why this is important to you. You have to get real with yourself and understand like your why. we will think about an alumni as a fan, or even like a student athlete alumni, and we all know like why we come and engage with Husky athletics. We know it's important to us from an athletics perspective. Obviously, it helps us develop into these fantastic people. We love competition. That's what keeps us going and moving through kind of the weeds when things get sticky or there's injuries or losses or whatever. That's what keeps us going. We understand why we do it. The same thing applies with this work. Is you have to understand why it's important. I can share my story. Coach Lake can share his story. Sophia can share her story. Braden can share his story. Dr. Harris, you can share your story, but like everyone's got to figure out like their own personal why, and then be able to wrestle with that so that keeps them grounded as they move forward. I think one of the things I just really want to capitalize on that Sophia and Coach Lake mentioned is like, this is really, allyship or co-conspiracy for underrepresented groups really shows up and shows out when people who aren't in the room who are being impacted. They don't necessarily have that voice or that positionality to always be everywhere to be the voice or to say this is wrong. But to Braden's point is he's like, I'm making people uncomfortable. We're going to talk about this, because there's probably certain circles that he's in where there's people that look like him that might say certain things that if they were in the space with, Sophia, Coach Lake, you, Dr. Harris, and I, they might not say those things, but that's how they feel in their heart. But Braden's utilizing his positionality and his privilege to say, oh, no, that's not what we're going to do. And providing perspective, holding people accountable, and then translating that into that humanness that we are all, obviously trying to preach and teach throughout this call is alumni. You got to see these student athletes and these staff and these coaches as humans. Yes, they put on a fantastic craft. It's entertaining as all get out. It's fun. The atmosphere is wonderful, but like they are people. We are people. And to see us outside of that or try to like separate that, you can't do that. First of all, like not allowed. I don't allow you to do that. Nobody can allow you to do that. But to humanize and to show, as Sophia was talking about, like with all the identities that come into play that then shape an experience. We're not Husky athletics when we're there for big game day, whether that's volleyball, whether that's baseball, whether that's football. We're not exempt from what's going on around the world. Yes, it's a time to maybe shut it out or channel it in a different way, but we have to realize that we're not exempt from that. So utilizing your positionality to get real with yourself, utilize your privilege to like have those difficult conversations, because you're there. You're the one that has influence. You're the one that gets to be an advocate. Hold yourselves accountable to doing that, figuring out your why. And then ultimately, like, we just got to remember that people have experiences that then influence how they will show up. So viewing people as humans and keeping that core is really important.
Thank you for that. Let's end with the final question to everyone. What's the next steps? What are your sort of calls to action to students, other coaches, other DEI folks? What if you had sort of the mic for the whole world? What would you say for sort of creating social justice and change? What's that call to action that you want to bring to people? Coach Lake.
Yep. Okay. Well, and I mentioned it in the beginning question. Our next thing that I'm very, very passionate about is police brutality, and we are going to bring those police officers in here from all across the state, and either from some other states, and bring them in here, and we're just going to have that open discussion. And so a lot of times we brought police officers in, whether when I was in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Detroit Lions, and they actually came in and said, hey, I'm the police officer. Make sure you guys don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. We're not bringing them in that fashion. We're bringing them in and we're all sitting down at the same level. And it's like, hey, let's get to know each other and let's have this uncomfortable conversation. We don't agree with this. We don't agree with that. And let's communicate here how we can get better, especially in our community, just here. But then I go back to the voting. So if this catches wind that we're doing this here in Seattle, okay, well now maybe down in California and the other Pac-12 footprints and across the West region, maybe they're going to do that in their footprints as well. And now all the police officers are going over to meet these student athletes that don't look like them, but all of a sudden they're going, you know what? Hey, that guy, he's just like my son. He's just like my brother. I shouldn't feel some sort of way if I pull them over and feel threatened, and then all of a sudden I get, and then they make a mistake, and all of a sudden we cost another life. And so that's what I'm passionate about. That's our next action that we're going to do in August. As soon as these COVID protocols open up and we can get people here in person, it's happening. It's going to be uncomfortable, but it's going to be beautiful. And I hope that catches wind and catches fire across our other Pac-12 footprints, and then maybe across the country.
That would be amazing. Braden, what are you thinking? What's your call to action?
So I was lucky enough when I was at UW to make friends over different teams. Super fortunate to stay in touch with a lot of them. And there's two in particular. One is a baseball player, and then another is a women's soccer player that are both graduated now. We're working on a coalition group to spread nationally in NCAA and also in pro sports to help enhance student athletes' voices. And when when a situation like last year happens, to give them a platform to elevate their voice and to actually take action. So we've come up with like a 3-pronged approach of educate, collaborate, and act. And we want to do that collaboratively. So examples, just over the last 3 months, we had a Creighton, their basketball coach ended up saying some things, and their players didn't exactly know the right way to handle it, because technically it is the guy who gave them their scholarships. So for us to get in touch with those players and to help them do it the right way, and if they want to act, help them do that in a way that won't affect them or put their careers in jeopardy. University of Texas and their fight song. You have, like Coach Lake said, you have people with a lot of money, a lot older than these 18 to 21-year-olds, basically telling them, no, we're not, we'll pull our money if you guys do X, Y, and Z. So to get in touch with those athletes and help them elevate their voice and do things in a way where they're not going to risk their career. And so as we grow and add more professional athletes and college athletes into our database, connecting, athletes from Tulane to activists in Louisiana, or connecting them to, people like you, Dr. Harris, in Seattle, to help them act on the passions that are driving them. So we're really excited about that, and hopefully we're able to roll that out, come football season.
That's great. That's really, really powerful. Sheridan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So, again, loaded question, because it's everyone's on a different part of their journey. I would say just a few things. Going back to it, you got to know what's important and why it's important. Because when you know why it's important, that's what's going to keep you pushing through things when they get difficult. And that's what's going to keep you pushing through when you get pushed back, or you're not liked, or you're the one that is kind of the squeaky wheel, if you want to say. So you got to know what's important, why it's important, and like what you're willing to lose as well when you're thinking about activism, whatever that looks like. And activism can come in many ways. A lot of people think activism is solely being on the front lines with a sign, yelling for whatever cause. And yes, that is one way to do it. But activism can show up in so many different ways. It is when you are utilizing your platform or your sphere of your influence. And I say, if you have connection with one person, you have an sphere of influence to push forth and create some type of change. So utilizing your positionality to do so, whatever that looks like, having conversations, sending emails, starting committees, creating plans, different things of that nature. Where we're at, we didn't get here yesterday. And I think that a lot of people are really kind of on the DEI train. Like we're really focusing on, supporting our student athletes and creating different programs and kind of the bells and whistles that come with it. But this stuff is rooted in the systematic oppression of many, many underrepresented groups. And you got to dig deep. We got to dig deep. We have to take the time to dig deep and give people the opportunity to really tell us how they're experiencing our spaces. A lot of times leaders can kind of just speculate and, oh, I know how people experience it, or we have an open door policy, or whatever have you. But I always ask folks, okay, so if that's the case, if people receive you that way, how do you know? And creating opportunities wherever you're at, whatever type of leadership capacity you're in, whatever type of influence you have, how do you actually know you're making impact? Oftentimes people who say that they're allies or they support things, you don't get to call yourself an ally. The people that you're being an advocate for, empowering, supporting, they get to deem you as an ally. That's not like a badge of honor that you get to place on yourself. So you continue to work, even when it's not popular, even when folks aren't in the room, even when no one's watching. That's when stuff actually changes. And the last thing I'll say, it's my favorite quote by Tarana Burke, the woman that started the Me Too movement. She says, you might not always be able to enjoy the shade of the tree that you plant, but plant the seed anyway. And I think that goes to show this is how I do in my everyday walk, in my job, in my personal life, is you don't know what one conversation can do. You don't know what one action can do. And you might never, ever get thanked for it. You might not ever get praised for it. You might not ever get acknowledgement for it. Shit, you might not even see it before you leave the earth. But plant seeds, because you don't know who you're impacting. To Braden's point, he's giving resources. He's trying to set athletes up for success. Coach Lake is talking to his coaches. He's talking to his student athletes. Sophia is just going to go off and change the world. But all that being said is, like, utilize who you are, as we were talking about. Channel your passions to just do something. Think about, like, what impact you want to leave on the world, and do something about it. Make an impact. We're all here to leave the world better than we found it. So I'll leave it at that.
Yes. Sophia, what's your call to action?
Yeah, I think it's sort of me reiterating what I've said over the course of this call, but it's just to listen and really confront how we can all do better in the spaces that we're in, and ask questions about how you as an individual are creating an environment for those that around you that, like, advocates for social justice. You know, listening, I can't overstate it, how important it is. You know, I'll never forget it. We were in Omaha, we were in our bubble, we were right before the Final Four, and we got the Derek Chauvin verdict. And, you know, I was a blubbering mess about it. And, you know, that's because I'm a human. And, you know, it doesn't matter if I'm about to play the biggest match of my life. That stuff affects you. And so for my coach to, like, have taken the time out of our very, very busy schedule before some of the biggest matches of all of our lives, and just sit with me and let me cry and let me talk about it was huge, you know. And those conversations, they lead to the deconstruction of stereotypes, and they humanize people, and they humanize them, you know, in terms of race or in terms of gender, you know. And that's so important, because, you know, a lot of those stereotypes, especially around people of color and police brutality, is that, you know, there's a stereotype of danger, and people perceive danger from people of color so often. And Coach Lake, that's why I love what you're doing with the football guys, because, you know, that danger has led us to places like what happened a year ago yesterday with George Floyd. You know, that police officer, in my mind, feared him so much so that he felt the need to do that, you know. And that's why it's so important that we just listen to each other and we talk to each other and we deconstruct that kind of thing. So that's what I would call everyone to do.
What a wonderful sort of thought to end this conversation. I am honored to have the opportunity to engage in this dialogue with you. I think one thing that's extremely clear is that college athletics is so much more than what happens in the court or the field. Especially at the University of Washington, I'll put in our own plug here. We build character. We help students find their passions, and then we follow through. And it's amazing to see where you all are at. So thank you so much. And thank you to the audience for hanging in with us and having this conversation with us. I hope you ponder it for a while and carry it forward. So thank you all so much. Have a great evening, and hopefully we'll see each other in person soon. Thank you.
Thank you.